Hi there, Ron here of Variable Play, and welcome to LarongAtin. So a new show inside the Variable Play network, and we also have Nico. You good, Nico?
Yep. Are we live na ba?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
All right. So since
Hello, good
Denmark
evening,
is not
everybody.
here, by the way, so with me is Freddy,
Mhm.
the publisher of LarongAtin, and Nico. Uh, Balangay.
Mhm.
So you head Balangay. Is it Balangay Entertainment,
Yeah, Balangay
right?
Entertainment.
And also a one of the core designers in the Larong Atin
Mhm.
design group,
Mhm.
and me. I'm also a designer. Na-inspire kami because of we had Ella previous episode, and she said, you know, I mean, you gotta be able to voice out and market yourself because who would do it for you? Like, you know what? You're right. It's like
Oh, is that why we're
I
here? I thought we were discussing games.
well, aside from that, I wanted to show. I mean, variable play has always been showcasing the people more than. I mean, the games are a big part of it, but more so are the people around gaming, and one of course, very important components um, of gaming are the game designers,
Mhm.
right, and the publishers. So that's why I thought, hey, maybe we could have a segment of our own where we just talk about more board gaming, tabletop gaming in general, but in a designer lens or in a publisher
Yeah.
lens. So we
Basically,
have
talk
some,
we already talk about, except this time make it public.
Mhm.
yes, things we already do in the chat rooms that we are in. So
Mhm.
Denmark is saying hi.
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 Another
Ah,
Nico.
how does
Nico
it
is
feel,
also
Denmark?
a tabletop RPG designer.
Now we're the ones
Hi,
here, and you're the
Nico.
one commenting. Not just joking.
All right. And then
Hello.
Kyo, big personalities. Hello. We're
Ron, you
nice.
said no one was gonna watch. But just kidding.
And then bang
Oh, so-
notify. Good evening, master.
Mhm.
Fred.
Si
I
Dan.
maybe is he in a different um is he in a different network? Oh, soy of oops, sorry. Here we go.
Hindi
Soy.
man. Ako yung nanalo eh.
Oh yeah, congratulations, Martin, for TatinCon 2021.
Yes.
So very fun event, and
Alam yes.
we got to play a lot of games.
Mhm.
Really fun.
Yeah, and a really well organized Discord too. The warp room was pretty cool. You guys see the
Yeah,
warp?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and
Uh,
the
Yeah.
ticketing
and
that was cool.
it's also very interesting to the dynamics of teaching games online is a little bit was quite different. It's quite different from normal teaching games.
Oh, other
So
Nico's here too. And
hi Soy. So Soy is heading solo board gamers of the Philippines, along
Okay.
with Clint and Marlon, and then
just got a
Gian
call.
is also saying hi.
Yeah, I saw their
Hey,
interview with uh,
they interviewed Dwayne.
yeah.
Yes. So very fun episode. Uh, it would be a nice thing to also see how he progresses into the game design world. So,
Like a nice guy.
mhm. All right. So, while I would be just quickly sharing to some uh, to some pages, uh, why don't we talk about, without spoiling,
Mhm.
what do you guys think about Trece?
Mm.
I think
Okay, so
it's
Has,
Uh,
has everyone watched it in the stream? But yeah, I guess we
Okay,
shouldn't
so no
go and
spoilers.
spoil.
ang
Yeah.
Yeah, no
generic lang siguro
spoilers.
muna na well, I think it's a great uh, achievement for Filipino comics. And
Mhm.
so just to be on an international platform like
Mhm.
that with so many translations, like may German and I don't know how many translations there is or how many languages it was translated to.
Mhm.
That's a big thing. And yun nangyari, it went number one sa Netflix sa Pilipinas, and then uh, and internationally nag-top 10 din siya with a lot of countries. Number 10 in US, number 7 in Canada.
Mhm.
Uh, Probably higher in countries with like UAE, uh, Singapore,
Mhm.
and I think there's a like maybe more than 10 countries na nag-top 10 siya. So that's huge. And ako
Oh,
mismo
Yeah,
pinanood three times.
si Soy, 4 times na.
si Soy daw is four times
Wow.
in different
Yeah.
languages, probably even including the editor's commentary. Uh,
Meron pa
I haven't, I haven't
yung
watched that.
ano ba tawag nila? After Dark?
Yeah,
Rest
yeah.
After Dark? Yeah.
yes. Oh yeah, I love that. I love the
I
just
haven't,
to
that's what I
see
haven't watched. Mhm.
it kind of gave us a glimpse of the struggle as well because it's such
Mm.
a global um, team. It wasn't like it was done in one design house and then that's it. They had team members from the US, team members from the Philippines, from Japan, from pretty much all over the place.
Mhm.
And probably part of it was maybe the lockdown was also affecting the whole production. I'm
Yeah.
just assuming because of how they were structured, but it just shows like just how much they had to go through, but still was able to tell a really good. I mean, it's a great story in the first place. I think
Mhm.
Trece is such a good IP. Then add to that, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to what happens next, and also looking forward to Nico's. You guys should wait for that. It's coming.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know when are you guys finishing up the designs, but we are. Nico, can you tell about a little bit about Trece Paradox?
Yeah, so I'm working on the Trece board game. It's no secret, I think. We're in beta play testing. So what I want actually now is to play test with me not being there, because baka
Mhm.
naman nag-enjoy kayo dahil nandun ako, hindi dahil sa game.
Yes.
That's always a thing with board games naman talaga, is that syempre the designer is like super enthusiastic about his design, so he might actually make the game more fun if he's there. So yeah, and balancing the different characters. Ako yung thoughts ko when I was watching it. So there was a lot happening while watching it. Pero parang afterwards, after I saw the whole thing, parang napaisip ako na, wow, this really helps me with my game. So si Sir Freddy and Ron have played the game. And when I was making it, so syempre, I was just reading the comics. In order to make it a real game, I had to like use my imagination and stretch the stories a bit. Um, Kasi syempre, the story is linear, but the game can go in different directions.
Yes.
Right.
And I hope I'm not really spoiling anything, but the anime took the story in directions that were different, but reinforced like the core concepts of the game. So
Yep.
parang,
Yeah, I think you
buti na
mentioned
lang.
even Sir Budget, right, was telling the script writers
Mhm.
that there are certain bits of their story that they only were able to discuss in a very short manner. Yet
Mhm.
it was very amazing how the team was able to take that component, enlarge it to now like yeah, you know what,
Mhm.
that does make sense. So
Yeah, actually, those are the
super
parts
cool.
that I enjoyed the most with the animation because the anime actually went beyond what was already in the
Mm.
comics
Mhm.
and not actually nag-tangent pa siya to the
Mhm.
point that, right now I'm thinking it's just an alternate multiverse
Yes,
stress
yes.
eh. So, pwedeng
I
sundan
like
siya
the
ng
whole
di ba?
Game of Thrones feel, right?
Yeah,
Where
di
you
ba?
can read the book
I
and enjoy it,
yeah.
and enjoy it on its own entirety. You can watch the series, enjoy it on its own entirety. Fine, they're not, it's not all perfect, but in every creation, you can't really just iron everything out. There's
Yeah.
so many things that could go wrong.
I
I
actually
like
think
that
that
it has that potential.
yeah, and I think that the anime of Trece, since you mentioned Game of Thrones, it actually went beyond like what Game of Thrones did with the novels. It the Game of Thrones kind of yeah, this feel like they played safe, but with Trece they didn't. They really went. They did things that are really tangent with what happened in the comics. Like you don't know how they're going to go back together. So and I think it's really a different story on its own than the
Yeah.
comics.
Yeah, in Game of Thrones, I think they would sort of rehash or repoint
Mhm.
different characters. The theme of what's going to happen is were similar.
Mhm.
Expanse had the similar technique
Mechanic, yeah.
where the storyline.
Mhm.
We'll get to that, guys. Where they in their storyline from the books, there's parallels, but it's not exactly the same.
Yeah.
And I think I like that idea because you
Mhm.
get to enjoy the same world and genre multiple times. You can read it, you can watch it, and
It's
they're all very different
actually
experiences.
yeah, it's like every new medium is a new playthrough of Trece Paradox. So
Yeah.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Perfect.
Yun yung
All
sinasabi
right.
ko,
yeah,
plug
so
in.
yeah.
Okay. So today we will be talking about. So these are not necessarily like the top games, but these are just our, top of mind favorites, or at least the quickest ones we can think of that we really recommend. So for the ones who are watching, thank you very much. Um, and if you are an aspiring designer, or at least you're thinking about designing games, these are games that we recommend that if you haven't experienced or played them, I think it's a good avenue to try out because either in my case there was, I think Nico and I had similar ideas where there's something unique inside that game that was very sort of eye-opening, and as a designer it's something that excites us, like, ooh, that's a cool thing. That's like I didn't see that movement. And so that one is how I did it on my end. Nico, how about you? How did you pick your top games to recommend?
Um, hmm.
Good evening, Morgan.
Hello,
So at
Morgan.
first, oh hi. So at first, when I got the prompt like earlier today, I really couldn't think of anything
Huwag mong
actually.
i-base to na
Um,
instant lang to. Joke lang, joke. They know
oh,
it.
in
Everybody
top of
knows it.
head,
Everybody knows it that it goes before the show.
yeah, top of mind is really legit top of mind. So
Yes.
so yon. Tapos medyo pagod pa ako kanina, so wala akong maisip talaga. I only thought of one game na feeling ko nasa listahan din ni Ron and ni Sir Freddy.
Mhm.
So so yon. And
Let's
then I
see.
just while I was eating dinner, just thinking about like what were things that struck me about games that I've played. And then I have a list. I wrote down 6 games, but I remembered I have a 7. Um, so yeah, if it's actually not it's just like a certain part now of the game of a certain game. It's not even the whole game in general. It's just like hey, this thing in this game looks pretty cool. So
Nico, this is for you.
yeah.
Yes.
Yep.
I actually
Yep.
have 2 tested designs, but the other one is super raw. Yung isa yung mas pwedeng may minis, I think. Yung Paradox, well, pwede naman, but yun, level, if you wanna try it, you can try it. So, yeah.
Nice, nice.
Anyways,
How about you, Sir Freddy? how did you pick your top of mind games?
Yung, it's not exactly yung top of mind. It's the list I have isn't exactly a list of games that I like playing. Yung kuwari, top 5 games, personal, na gusto kong laruin. No, it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I thought of it like per genre or type of game. And ano yung either nauna or would highlight that specific type of game best. Yung pinakang pure na game of that type. That's mainly because when I look at a game, not as a designer, as a publisher, ang unang tinatanong ko, and usually I ask help from you guys mga, meron na ba kayong nakitang ganito?
Yeah.
This game like something else that's already out there? So that's very important because why make a game that's already been made? Or, di ba, yung parang, what's the worst thing I can hear? This is like Dominion, except it's set in the Philippines. Then why are we making it? Di ba? So, it doesn't have to be, when we're doing something, it can't be just a retheme. It has to be something na merong bago. Di ba? That's how I look at it. Ano. So, kaya yung listahan ko is not necessarily my favorite games, but it's a list of games that I think kailangan at least alam mo. So you don't you get
You don't play
familiar.
you don't play the same tune.
Exactly. Yun.
Okay. Cool. All right. So in that light, Sir Freddy, would you like to start? What is that first game that designers should have tried at the very least, or at least should research or learn about? Pero better, of course, if you play it.
This is a game I played a long time ago, a long time ago, but not anymore. So, ang unang sasabihan ko siguro is yung worker placement game. The worker placement game, I would suggest an aspiring game designer, kung wala ka pang nalarong worker placement game, probably try to play Kalos. The reason I say Kalos is not because it's the most fun worker placement game, but I think it's the most pure dahil wala siyang cards, wala siyang random, wala siyang anything. You're just putting workers, tokens, on the board and getting an effect.
Yeah.
Yung mga later on na nag-develop na worker placement, they'll have cards na may random effect na, so hindi mo alam kung ano yung makukuha mo and stuff like that. Kalos, I think, is the most, I'm not sure if it's the first sa genre na yan, but I think pure.
They did mention it on the history. There was Kalos was like a variation of another game that they were still sort of referring to, and they were a little bit iffy because it wasn't entirely feeling like a worker placement. But there was another game in reference to Kalos that are sort of being parallel, but it's not quite because the other one was like a bidding of like what to do. But it was that feeling of taking a worker and placing it on a spot. Kalos kind of like streamlined it. I put it on a spot. This happens. So I think
I haven't played it, so I'm writing down Kalos.
There you go.
But it's definitely not the most fun worker placement. But I think it's worth learning from a purely mechanics point of view.
Yeah. Morgan saying Kalos is the father of worker placement games. Yes, I think it really started the genre, which has the permutations of worker placement to today's world of after. I think Kalos was like 90s or late 2000s, and so the permutation of 20 years worth. It's just amazing. Worker placement nowadays is so hard to like pinpoint. Is it like you now have this term? It feels worker placement because there's so many other things around it.
Yeah. Fusion na ngayon ang uso.
Mm.
You take this and that and then boom. May fusion ka
Yes.
ng dalawang types of games, and then you come up with something totally new.
Mhm.
Y-
Oh,
Well, that kind of
so
makes more
Kalos, they
sense.
said, is Fred mentions Kalos is in BGA already.
BGA, laro
So,
na.
so
Yeah.
that means you guys can try it out.
Next Unpub game night. I think
Yeah.
this
I think they're
Saturday
already
we're playing
setting it up. So Morgan is
Yeah.
saying he hasn't played, and then Fred is saying, "Let's go." Good job.
And then
So
after playing, you'll all hate me because it's not fun.
at least you played it.
Mhm.
All right. Okay.
Mhm.
How about you, Nico? What is
All
your?
right, let me check my list. So the first game that parang when you asked this prompt, there was one game that really like you have to mention me, of course, would be Magic the Gathering. Um, yeah, it's not on your list. You guys. I thought this would be the game that would be on all of your lists. Um, and I think Magic because I think being the first like TCG, being the progenitor of the TCG genre, is kind of like what in a way democratized like game design in a way. So it's maybe the first game wherein the experience of the game is actually game design because you're building
Yes.
your deck, right? The, ga-
Right.
the game of Magic is basically okay. Here's a whole set of mechanics. You choose which ones you're going to play with, and so
Right.
the experience of building your deck in a way is like game design with the kids gloves on, right? Because you're mixing and matching mechanics. You're building the game, but with restrictions. So I think that like personally, that's what made me interested in game design, and I think a lot of game designers would probably like trace the roots. Like, oh, okay, game design is something you can do because they were building their deck in Magic. So yun. But of course, aside from that really core experience of like I'm making this game design, the stack is infamous to some people because it's a little hard for some people to comprehend. Me, not so much because I took up engineering, so we took that up in programming. But just the concept of like out of turn plays, being able to do something when it's not your turn, when you can trigger something, I think is something that you would, even if you won't use it for your actual game, you have to be aware that those kinds of mechanics can exist. That you should not be bound to just your turn. So that's the two things. So just like the experience of building a deck, building a game design as the game in a way, and out of turn plays. So there. So
Yeah.
that's my like
That's
number
Nico,
one.
you are such a game designer because I've never looked at that part of Magic as game design, but you are
Really,
absolutely correct.
really.
And it's only through a game designer's lens that you'd see, huh, that is actually a game within outside of a game.
Uh,
The designing
okay.
of the game. So that's
That's
amazing.
that's surprising for me because I have seen that discussion before. I just don't know where. I don't know where I've
Hmm.
seen that discussion. Na parang like, yeah, it's like the Magic was the gateway drug to game design in a way. It's what like made people feel like, oh, I could make a game. But I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining things. Maybe I had a fever dream. But
Well,
I remember
because
reading
Magic had a lot
Totally
of.
agree. I think I've heard something like that before, but it's
uh-huh.
not been talked about recently or ano, parang it's probably an old discussion,
Mhm.
but yeah, that's true. Your point is very very true. Yung deck building is actually
Mhm.
game design because you're designing how your deck will play in the
Mhm.
game.
Right.
So you're participating in that. Actually, Garfield is really a genius.
Mhm.
Yes,
Mhm. Yeah.
absolutely. All right.
Mhm.
So, I would tangent. Well, so I think guys, the ones who are in the chat and the ones in the stream, Armando, he's a designer from Mexico. I think he mentioned the game. I haven't checked the link yet, so I'll have
I
to
am
do that
making a
on a
board game.
separate notice. But if you guys want to check that out, please go ahead
About
and check out his link. Um, so on my case, the basic recommendation that I had. So I'm going to start out with something. I think it's fairly new, maybe about 3 years worth or four. It's called Insider, and it's a social deduction game where you guys are just there's a clue for a word. Let's say the word is uh, wind chimes. So everybody doesn't know the word except the insider. The insider
Mhm.
would actually be shown the word, and then the game starts, and you have like 2 minutes, I think, where you guys have to figure out what is the word. So you're gonna be asking the master of the ceremonies, who also knows the word, what is the what is it like this? It's kind of like playing 20 questions. Is it a fish? Is it human? Is it blah blah blah? You guys trying to arrive to that. Since the insider knows, they can sort of coax the conversation towards that very obscure word. And now suddenly you guys have once it's you guys figure it out, you now have to figure out if the insider the if who the insider is, if there was if the one who guessed the word was the insider and so forth. It's a tiny game, very small box, but it's able to compress social deduction, word games, sort of party games all in one. And if you haven't tried some
inside.
that game, I think um, it's a good intro to sort of how social dynamics play in game design. And it's just guessing a word, but you just make that small twist wherein one person or another person knows it, and you have to figure suss that person out, and tada, you have a game that has been playing quite well. There's a little bit of controversy because I think where words copied the
Okay.
similar mechanic, but they
Uh,
added roles, but they didn't credit Insider. The thing is,
that's
Insider
what.
was made by Oink Games, and Oink Games is at that time a very small Japanese company, so maybe
Japanese.
they
Yeah.
didn't know, which kind of leads to that lesson too. You might want to really try out a lot of games because sometimes you might be doing something that's already been done before, and then
Mhm.
suddenly you publish it all the way through, and it looks exactly like another game.
Yep.
So it's very difficult in to when that happens to sort of no, we designed it on our own sandbox.
Mm,
Yeah, internet.
mm,
All right,
mm.
so that's my recommendation for my, my number five. All right, let's
I
go
want to add
to
to. I just want to add that it's interesting. Social deduction games. I mean, because just because you mentioned it, it's interesting because when you are designing that kind of game, you're not necessarily designing game mechanics, right? You're designing group dynamics, right?
yes,
You have to design how the players will interact. And
yes,
sometimes people think game design is more about the game mechanics, but um, it's also good to step out of the box and not just look at the game in terms of its game mechanics or like just thinking about that that's what was designed, because when you're thinking about social games, your focus should really be on the group dynamics that you're designing.
yeah.
So yeah.
Players as the components.
Mhm.
All right, let's move on to number four. So Freddy,
Uh, the next one would be deck builders.
Mhm.
Yun, the way I'm ano. So the deck
sure.
builder, dito mag-overlap kami ni Nico because the deck builder originally is Magic the Gathering. And then,
Mm-hmm.
yun talaga yun. Magic the Gathering was really the first deck builder. And then, how many years? I think 7 years later, That's when Dominion came out, which is what
Mm-hmm.
we call the deck builder game.
Mhm.
Yeah.
But the original deck builder really is Magic the Gathering.
Mhm.
So in this category, I think you have to study. If you're making a board game deck builder, the first thing you should study is not necessarily Magic the Gathering, but probably Dominion,
Mm.
because it's self-contained. So if that's the kind of game design and you're not designing a TCG, you have to study Dominion. That's the purest deck builder out there, I think.
Except
Uh,
Darn.
huh?
Just joking.
What's
Except
that?
Darna Deck Builder. Except Darna Deck
What?
Builder.
That's probably not gonna come out.
Yeah, sorry. So sorry. So apparently
Not for a long
whispering
time.
doesn't sound very well here. Okay.
Okay, so Dominion something you probably have to study, and I think most probably halos lahat ng board gamers probably know of Dominion. They
Mm.
probably know, they may hate it, but I think it's the mechanics are just so pure
Mhm.
na nung first time ko siya makita, talagang wow, this is a great re-implementation of deck building na self-contained siya. So, and yung deck building mo happens while you're playing. So, it's a very different concept from the deck building na originally na ginawa ng Magic the Gathering, di
Yeah.
ba?
I
So,
think
yung implementation doon, and then
nowadays they
later
use the
on,
term deconstruction because you
mhm,
sort of construct it before you play.
Mhm.
But back in the day, I do remember the term build your deck
yes.
before deck building, which is the act of continuously building a deck, came about because of the meme.
So, ngayon, the newer deck builders, they integrate other things from the with the deck building. Yun yung sinasabi, what we were talking about, they're fusing things. Like, you look at Clank, they've uh, they've fused Dungeon Delve
Right.
with a deck builder. Uh, we've seen deck builders with area control.
Mhm.
So right now, if you come up with something a reskin of Dominion, it's going to be bad because why are you making it? So it's important for you to know all these things that's already out, so you don't, end up doing the same thing and end up what you want to be doing is improving on that and then adding on to that. So yun, deck builders yung number two category ko.
Agree. I think deck
Mhm.
building was such a broad, well, it was already a broad idea of
Mhm.
Magic the Gathering days where you're building decks and then you're fighting with them. Uh,
Mhm.
there are multiple formats in Magic the Gathering. Drafting, in
Drafting.
essence, where you're continuously adding cards to your deck as you play, and then fighting out with that deck. Um, so I think a lot of the designs, like what Nico said, there are distilled versions of certain aspects of Magic the Gathering. If you kind of zoom in to certain things that Magic is doing. So Richard Garfield, I think before Magic, he had designs that are pretty much even more complex than the Magic the Gathering game. What he thought was more complex apparently was the reverse. Apparently, Magic the Gathering was the design that proves if robots are sentient. Isn't that there's a an AI that computes already using Magic the Gathering mechanics. Anyways,
Mhm. Ah, yeah. It passed the Turing test, right? Magic.
yeah.
Yeah. I think, yeah. Mm.
Okay. So,
Mhm.
Nico, how about you? What
Yeah.
is your number four recommendation?
Okay. So, well, I'm going to also say a deck builder just to build on what Sir Freddy said. Um, oh, yep. Yeah, Dominion is the who's the designer, but he was the guy who thought of it, and then everyone's like, "Why didn't we think about this?" So, and then everyone's like, "We're gonna copy that because it's the best idea at the time."
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh, I haven't
Yes,
played the
Ang
starter.
daming naging anak
it's
ng
such a big
Dominion.
game. Yeah, I mean,
Mm.
after Dominion, you kick into Ascension and stuff, and just
Mhm.
Mhm.
just this whole river
Yep.
Yeah.
of there you go.
Yeah. So yeah. So
Donald Vaccarino is the
That's it.
designer.
okay. So the game I brought in
Thank
will
you,
actually be
Kunichi
Legendary.
and Kian.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, go
So
ahead.
yeah, Legendary Marvel Legendary. That would be my fourth uh, game. Precisely because it's a deck builder. Um, but so what? Why this among the deck builders? Well, first of all, I think because since the topic was like, what would be a good game to play if you're going about in your um, you want to design games. I think that it's good practice to try to make a deck builder, um, just as a game, because the template, the base mechanics of deck building, wherein you're buying cards, you're putting it into your deck, and then you're shuffling your deck. It's already complete in a way, and it's already fun without you having to really do much with it. So parang the part is more of like designing the actual cards, but not your core engine that is the center of the game. So it's a
Mhm.
good way to practice wherein you already have like your basic design there, and you just have to develop it into a full game. So it's a good way to okay, you want to make a game, you start with a deck builder, and you're already iterating from the very start. You don't have to come
Right.
up with a base idea that clicks. And yeah, it's just good practice where you're straight into iterating, you're straight into play testing, because it's already such a good template. So, but why did I choose Legendary among the other deck builders? Um, well, personally, it's because it was the first deck builder I played wherein the theme kind of was more intuitive. Because right, like Dominion, I mean, the theme
What?
doesn't really
What are you talking about?
connect to the mechanics so much.
Yeah.
It's just like
The
you're
duchy. The duchy is so thematic.
so yeah, it's just like oh this does this adds actions. Why? It's not really because that's not really the deal, right? It's really
Yeah.
you just want to maximize. You want to really have points. And Legendary is usually compared to DC Deck Builder because DC Deck Builder is though the simpler game. It's also kind of like the theme is not that big a deal. But Legendary is the one wherein um, the theme really kind of makes more sense because there's these villains going through the city and you have to defeat
Right.
them and it's cooperative. So yeah, it's just a good way of using theme to make the game more intuitive and to like really deliver an experience because there that's I mean when you're yeah, so there the cards
The
being
conveyor.
pushed. But it actually makes sense inside the game. It's not just because we want to earn points and we're just slapping on art and names onto the cards. So there, it's like I think it's good to still play like Dominion, still play DC deck building, but then go to Marvel and like just look at the difference. It's not so much
Yeah.
what you think is the better game, what is the worst game, but just like seeing how they tweak mechanics in order
Mhm.
to give it theme and
Right.
to just give it make more
How
sense for
this
experience. Mhm.
exactly like how the designer of Legendary
Mhm.
versus the designer of Ascension versus the designer of Star Realms, how did
Mhm.
they take that same framework but
Mhm.
created a different game?
Mhm.
Of course, there are very similar games where it's like, hey,
Mhm.
that's exactly the same thing, just like rehash. And those are also quickly sussed out. Like people are reacting to that. Hey, there's no game there because it's exactly just this. There's nothing new. But you can only say or recognize what is new and what's not if you've tried them, right? If you've
Mhm.
experienced them, because you this is now what I kind of call the four chords of game design. It's the same four chords. But you can make a new, very catchy song if you have listened enough, if you have
Yeah.
played enough, and you've tried enough. Then you can sort of recognize making a new game design out of a similar or familiar frame.
Yeah, and
Cool.
just
Yeah.
I just remembered also extra props to if you've played Legendary Aliens. Have you played the
Mm.
Aliens theme of
Yes.
it? So
Yes.
yeah, it's the same engine, but they even made it more thematic because now you have to scan the cards and it kind of feels like that scene in Aliens where they're in that narrow hallway and you don't know where the aliens are coming from and then they look in the and then they're in the ceiling pala. So yun, so still deck building, coming from a very dry kind of game and just adding these little tweaks to make it more thematic. So there.
Mhm.
So
Desky
that's that.
mentions that he
Yeah.
mentioned a very same batch. So Ascension, Nightfall, I think, was also in the same timeline. Uh,
Yep.
Idea of combo building as you deck build. Rune Age, I loved it. I just couldn't figure out the balance in some of the games. I don't know. I know, Desky, you're familiar with this. There's some factions like, wow, this thing is so powerful, but it's such a good looking deck builder. And of course, nowadays you have Lost Ruins of Arnak, Dune Imperium, Path of Light and Shadows, so many great deck builders that have taken the genre a step further. But it's great to see them at their raw, sort of more pure form, and then start to see how they progress. And I think it's a good designer exercise also, so that you can then innovate from those designs. All right. So my number four is a card game, not a deck builder though,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a very small one. Actually, I think most of my games here, except for the last one, are small. Um, but it's called Red Seven. So Red Seven is made by the guy who made Botainai. Wait, why would I not? So Carl Chudik. So I'm so sorry, Carl Chudik. Why would I not remember your name? So Red Seven is like the gamer version of Flux. You guys know Flux, where you have this sort of rule, and then you are playing sort of Munchkin style, where I play a mechanic, play a card to try to complete a set. In Red Seven, your goal is there's a rule. Let's say highest card wins. So you just need to end your turn where you have a bunch of options, like three types of actions or four, I can't remember. Um, and you just need to end your turn that you're not losing. You're basically winning that whatever rule that's currently in play. And the other players now have different options. They can change the rule. They can try to comply with it. They can try to build up on it. They can try to uh, build up their palette and then change the rule. They just need to make sure that they end their turn that they're winning. So Red Seven is, and that's just the base game. So this is like a small card game that is actually multi-use cards. There are so many things that you can do. There are other layers on top of it. You can sort of play a campaign with it. It's such a very interesting design where it's just literally seven colors. You have the seven colors. Each of the seven colors are rules. But somehow Carl Chadek was able to make such a confusing and like the funniest part about this game and why some people kind of don't like it is that when you're about to lose, it is your longest turn because you will be spending a few moments there trying to like just try to solve whatever is, and you're not entirely believing that you've lost already. So that's the funny thing about that. But being able to see a small card game with very small UI changes. And Fred is saying, muntik na raw siya umiyak. So yeah, so it's a very interesting. If you are getting into design, this is such a compressed game of such a lot of interlocking mechanics and layers. In fact, you can play it with more rules, but So as a game designer, it's a great experience. It's not for everyone though. It's not like your hey Lola, I'll teach you Red 7. That's not gonna work. No, but it is for a designer a good perspective to like what are the possibilities of mechanics and how crazy can I go? And then if you've learned all that, like you've learned the most difficult things to play, and then you sort of distill it back down again, suddenly you'll have like the skills to design more effective, simple games because you've kind of learned the complexities of how do you actually make such a complex game in a small package. That is Red 7. So seek that out. All right. Number
I
three.
knew you were going to include at least one multi-use card game.
Of course.
That was the only thing I was sure of your list. Is it going to be Glory to Rome? Is it going to be?
Tanichi's going like Red 7 number 1. They know me well. Thank you very much, guys. All right. Sir Freddy, what is your number 3?
I'm going the direction naman this time for economic games.
Mm-hmm.
So for economic games, I think the best game for somebody to study would be Power Grid because of the supply demand thing. That was brilliant for its time. When I saw that mechanic, talagang wow, galing ah. Wow, that's really good. How you can implement supply demand. So Power Grid, there's of course other games, economic games that are kind of different from that, but I think Power Grid is a basic game that you have to learn if you want to make economic games. So yun,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that's
So actually, I'm gonna have to cross out my number 1 because my number 1 recommendation is Power Grid.
no, you can, di ba?
I can
You
add.
just
I can add the man. I can
Yeah,
add.
you
So,
explain.
but just so Friedman Fries is such a genius, mad scientist of game design. And in his notes, if I'm not mistaken, one of like or probably one of his interviews, his one of his quotable quotes is like, "Don't be afraid to add complexity to your game." It's like that's like every reverse thing that you say to every designer. It's like every designer, trim the fat, cut it down, go back to basics. Like make it streamlined. Like he goes, no. uh, don't be afraid to make it complex. Make it 3 hours. Make 504 possibilities of a game. So he's a designer of 504. But going back to Power Grid, yeah, the closed market, based on how I buy my resources, it changes the price. Just like just such a small rule, but and that's exactly the whole game. I mean, it was just repeating. You just buy stuff, then buy more stuff to sort of move around the board, and 90% of the game is you pretending that you can add. Eventually, by the end of the game, your calculators are out because you can't na. At the beginning of the game, you're still, I can 10 plus 7, 17 plus, kaya pa sa simula, pero after a while, like, calculators out, I need to power 15 cities. So, such a good game, Power Grid. I think if there is um, if there would be one economic game that you guys need to try, it has to be at the very least Power Grid because it really gives you a good sense of how to implement the rules of Power Grid. Is actually very simple. It can be explained really fast, but yet the game still plays 3 hours if you are not careful. All right. Okay, we do have a question here. So before we get to you, Nico, Clint is asking if you want to design a solo only game, what is your recommendation? So anyway, before you can think about that,
Uh-huh.
so Nico, what is
Yeah,
your number 3?
my sorry, but they just the initial answer in my head for Clint's question. I'm so sorry, Clint, but my initial answer is don't. Just don't make a solo game for the start.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because making a solo game has the same problems as making a cooperative game, wherein you have to code in an AI in a way of some sort in the game. Unless, of course, you find like that really good design that doesn't need it. Sometimes some co-op, like Hanabi, let's say, is a co-op game, but Hanabi is not a solo game. But like that kind of game where it doesn't need one. So co-op solos in a way are kind of like designing on hard mode. So it might be better to design like a competitive game first, just to get your feet wet. But if you do need to want to design a solo game, I would suggest going something deck builder again, maybe. Like I haven't played Agent Decker, but I think I hear a lot of good things about it. So I don't know if that's something to check out. So there.
Okay.
Okay, so my um, third game might be a little surprising. Would be Ticket to Ride. So um, yeah, Ticket to Ride, and I'm not even like the Europe and stuff. Just basic Ticket to Ride, and the reason why is because it's a good study in terms of design space. So what is design space? Design space is like the variables that exist in your game that the players can manipulate and that they can play in. So if you imagine like a, let's say, let's just say a video game that you're running around and you're hacking enemies. So one design space would be like just, well, two design spaces would already just be the X and Y axis you can run. So as opposed to, let's say, a side scroller, you have only one axis where you're going from left to right. But if it's like a 3D game, then you can go left, right, and forward and backward. So just that, the multiplying those two design spaces together, which is just those two axes, increases the amount of things a that you can do in the game in a very intuitive way. So right, I mean, you wouldn't really think much about the difference between a side scroller and like running in a 3D space. But
Mhm.
with a 3D space, you can already do so much more. And then if you add a third design space would be like jumping. So there, so now you can run around and then you can jump. So you can now do platform. You can do all sorts of things with just those three elements. So Ticket to Ride, I think, is a good study in terms of design space because there are very few design spaces in Ticket to Ride, but all of them work really well with each other and they all carry their weight so much. And that's why the game is so easy to learn. It's super intuitive, but there's still a lot happening. I mean, there's a lot of it's not the most strategic and complex game, but considering the weight of it, there's so much you can do. So right, so you have the map on your turn. What's one design space is just what action are you going to take on your turn? Are you going to draw cards? Are you going to put down things? And then you compound that with what the other players are doing. So the nice thing also about an elegant game like Ticket to Ride is that it's easy to guess what the other players are doing. So the mind games are more pure because it's more restricted, but it's not like automatic. You can't fully guess what the next player is going to do. So you have what cards are you going to draw? What cards are you going to play? And then the board state is continuously being brought to a fruition.
Yeah,
That's a nice
because
thing.
of
A
the
lot of
player interaction, sort of
uh,
uh, the game is automatically sort of pushing everybody to the edge. Like
yes, yes.
it's reducing your options as you play, making the
Mm-hmm.
game more difficult, but did not shock. Like it's a very good gateway because it allows players to ease into the complexity. At the
Mm-hmm.
beginning, it's okay. I'll
Yep,
just
yep.
grab cards. It's okay.
And then yun, when your design spaces work super well with each other, wherein they're like they work as they create exponential behaviors. What you call do you call that? What's the term? The term is an emergent behavior, wherein it's a strategy, a tactic, something, anything that's happening in the game that the designer did not necessarily put there in particular. Like not hard, it's not something that's hard coded into the game. It just exists because there are so many of these layers that interact with each other that the players can be creative in their own way. So I think Ticket to Ride is a masterfully done design in that
Yeah.
sense. So simple, but there's so much things that can happen. There's so many mind games you can play. It can be so frustrating. And the other thing that's really interesting about Ticket to Ride that makes it super easy to get into is that the complexity is actually hidden in plain sight. It's hidden on the board. It's not like let's say you're playing Magic, wherein you have to memorize every card ability and stuff, and then you try to imagine what are the different ways in which they work together. Ticket to Ride. Um, what makes it interesting is the asymmetry of the roots on the board, and that had to be designed. But
Yep.
it's something that the players don't have to worry about. It's not a mental load on the players,
Right.
but it's there to add the complexity, to add the strategy, and it's just really good design because it's complicated, but the players don't feel that mental load. They don't feel that intimidation. It's just there.
Mhm.
And then imagine if Ticket to Ride were like the routes were just rectangles and everything was equidistant. It would be super boring, right?
Yes.
It's just
Uh,
it's the complexity. The design is it's hidden. Its complexity is hidden.
yeah.
So there.
To
So I
connect to
think that's
that,
why it's a good
yes.
study.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
to
actually,
connect to that, actually,
it's a ride on my list. But
Oh,
but
okay,
yeah,
cool.
it's really a good game. There's a reason why there's over 6 million of that sold.
Yeah.
It's
That's
one
the
of
true evergreen.
hmm
So
and
actually,
why different boards are a completely different game because the
yeah,
complexity is hidden on the board.
yeah. Actually, I'll connect that back to the question a while ago, which was actually what I was thinking. So when Clint asked, like, if you're gonna design a solo game, what game do you want to start with? Before I explain, like Desky mentioned, automatons are nice because in solo game design, there's now the idea of AI, and normally there's a card deck or some sort of mechanism, some set of rules that allow you to interact and as if there's another player. Some are just puzzles, like the ones I've designed for Folded Wishes, where it's more of like here's a complexity, and I've created some rules for you to solve, and it's basically a solo puzzle. Some are narrative driven. Kingdom Death Monster is using an AI deck. Massive Darkness is using some sort of AI. However, going back to the design space, especially for new aspiring designers, my recommendation is actually Pandemic, um, because of,
Mm-hmm.
and it kind of connects to how what Nico is saying with the map of Ticket to Ride. The real complexity is actually on the board, that it has been removed away from the players, that they don't notice that that's the complexity. So the route where I need to solve, I need to go here. Here's my location currently. Here's my available resources. Here's the available actions I have. Can I do this? It's the same idea with Ticket to Ride. I have this X of cards. I need to do that. So as a designer, um, the if you're trying to design a game, it is a lot more complex to create narrative. You need a lot of good writing. There's a lot of research. There's a lot of playtesting mechanics. But often I try to remind new designers, see if you can find a good base first, because it's a lot easier, a lot faster for you to get into something. So if you are creating a smaller space where the complexity is sort of laid out in front and then people are trying to solve that, and you can still make it work as a co-op, you'd be surprised how difficult co-ops are to design. It is not, because the game has to fight you,
Yeah.
and you're going like, huh, this is so hard to balance. The math of this is very different, because you need to get that progression, you need to get that sort of uh, wave of complexity that again has to come in mechanically. It doesn't come in like you just it just does this. Otherwise, it doesn't come naturally. That is what pandemic is doing. That very small idea of I have these cities and they will go back whenever a pandemic is triggered. That very small rule creates the complexity of pandemic aside from the resource management.
Yeah.
If you have that as your base, I think it's a good base for designing solo games. Then you will master at least the idea of how to build up complexity using mechanics rather than sort of here's the instruction how to create the complexity. Just do this, because it while it's detached, you have some sort of AI in front of you deciding. And I love how automatons are able to like really simulate players. As a aspiring designer, I think it's a good way to learn how do you actually build complexity over time, that it doesn't hit you right away, but it gives you that curve, that upwards curve. And I think that's all now also going to be my third recommendation. If you are an aspiring designer, you gotta play Pandemic. I think it's one of the
Pandemic.
classics, and
Yeah.
there's no. I mean, if it's also a very good eye opener. If like gateway games, yeah, Pandemic definitely solves the deal. Close second would be it's already out of print. The Space Hulk Death Angel, because it's just too punishing. But Pandemic, I think, is the cleanest of the frameworks out there in terms of how to build a co-op. Forbidden Island is a little bit too simple. Pandemic is your way to go. Alrighty, let's get
There's
to number
also
two. Yes, Nico.
yeah, just in terms of the AI thing also. I personally would not recommend do like making a game with an AI. Um, at least if for practice or if you're starting out, because you might come to this problem wherein if you have a problem in the game design, what do you fix? Do you fix the game or do you fix the AI? And that can easily compound and get you stuck in development hell, wherein you don't know which one you're going to tweak. Um, if you want to design an I would suggest you take a game that already exists wherein you cannot touch the game design. The game design is done. Then you design an AI for that. Because shifting between which one do I need to fix? Is it the AI or the game? That's easily gonna give you a really big headache. So yeah. Oh yeah. Okay.
Actually, that's very true. Like, I personally can't even wrap my head around playing a board game solo. Yun
Yeah,
eh. It's really a very different mentality. It's obviously a mentality I don't have. So, totoo yun. That's really what Sol said.
yeah. I think, and it's amazing when you get to try out new solo games because it is very. It gives you the complexity in form of an experience, and kind of like playing a video game. But there are like new innovations where it really reduces a lot of the rules. It gets you to the board faster, quicker, but still give you amount of play, because now the design consideration is okay. I need to be the most least intimidating, quick to the board. Because if my but there are solo games that is really like you gotta open up some, gotta brew some tea and stuff. So there are those. Yes, Lesky, I love Death Angel. I will squeeze it in every time I have an opportunity, even if it is very punishing. That I hate that dice. It is the most punishing dice ever designed. All right, let's go to number two.
All right.
Before I go to number two, babalikan ko yung Ticket to Ride.
Uh-huh.
Na-mention naman ni Ron yung yung pagbubuhat ng sariling bangko. I'd like to mention that maybe a lot of you haven't actually tried Bagani.
So
Bagani has a lot of parallels with the Ticket to Ride. And I think Bagani is a more concise and more accessible version of Ticket to Ride. It's in that set collecting uh, kind of game. And if you can get, you should check that out. Designed by Nico here.
Yay.
Okay, so hindi na rin naman tayo sa team na yun, di ba?
Hmm.
Yes.
So my number two, not exactly my number two, but this is my fourth category, which is social deduction.
Mhm.
With social deduction, the basic, the most basic social deduction game is Werewolf. So it's something you have to try. It's not that difficult to get into. You don't even need to buy the game Werewolf. You can just write the rules on pieces of cardboard and pieces of paper and then play it if you have the rules. Uh, on the other end of the spectrum naman ng social deduction, you'll have something like Battlestar Galactica, which
Mhm.
takes 3, 4, 5 hours to finish. And I think if you want to design social deduction, which we've realized is probably one of the most difficult types of games to design, the hard
Rather.
way, the hard way,
Mhm.
you have to, you have to try all these games out and have an understanding of social dynamics.
Mhm.
Uh, I think that's an even more important skill to have than the actual game mechanics when you're trying to design social deduction. So we've gone through some social deduction mechanics na wow, on paper sobrang ganda, sobrang linis. And then when we're playing this, oh, it's too perfect. Which
Mhm.
is because the whole point of the social deduction game is you have to have imperfect information. And part of the problem with designing social deduction is it just doesn't work with all groups. There will be some groups that will never have a good experience with social deduction. May ganun lang talaga. So, yun, social deduction, werewolf, Battlestar Galactica, and things in between.
Mhm. I would
Okay.
like to add also that even if you're not going to design a social deduction game, and I wouldn't suggest designing one as the start, um, playing social deduction games really help um, when you're like theory crafting a game design, because social deduction, a lot of social deduction is basically getting into the head of the other players
Mhm.
and trying to figure out what they're going to do, what they're thinking, what they're trying to catch them off guard and find ticks and stuff like that. And that in itself is already a big skill in designing games itself, because when you're designing the game, you want to try to get into the head of your players and try to see how they're going to try to abuse and break the game. And so by playing social deduction games, you're already practicing that, so that when you're actually play testing your game or when you're actually designing, you can already forecast how the players are going to try to break and abuse your game to win. So just playing the social deduction game is already practice in play testing, or at least
Yeah.
in just um, seeing how the players are going, like already play testing in your head, like before they even play test. You already can see, they're gonna try to do this, they're gonna try to do that to break my game. So you're already play testing inside your head. Sometimes nga parang yung joke, diba? Parang may pagka-schizo ang mga game designers, especially when you're what do you call this, solo testing, shadow play testing by yourself in a very early stage. You're playing three players at the same time. But playing social deduction games helps in that. It's like, oh, okay, I'm challenged. This player is Sir Freddy. Okay, this is what Sir Freddy is going to do. And this player's Ron. Okay, so now I'm playing with Sir Freddy and Ron, and okay, Ron's turn. Ron is gonna do this and ganito ganyan. So yeah, it helps. Para when you actually bring it out na, medyo may konting na bugs na napatcha na. May some of
Yeah.
the holes already been. You're not gonna catch them
I know what you mean, Nico, because for example, like the game I'm designing at the moment, the epidemic card game, uh, I I was initially mostly testing it as efficient
Mhm.
as I could. Like gamers are like hacking it. What is the math for that? And what I didn't realize is if it's reverse. and people are playing loosely and they're not necessarily playing it correctly, but they're still somewhat sort of following the correct rules or habits. It actually breaks the game a little bit because they're like, you're wasting so much resources on like dead cards that are just outside of the deck, and then it just, it so it's interesting. You're right that when you try out to design social deduction games, it gives you a good perspective of like how players think, and it's
Yeah.
a good practice to also try to accommodate different psychologies when
Yeah.
you're designing games.
Yeah, because they have
Shipwreck
their own.
Arcana, I think that Denmark mentioned is a co-op where you have to like make another player figure out what your dice is. And then Wharf Whispers is just this area control. It's kind of modern area control social deduction, where you are moving dudes on the map. But it's funny because like it's the most in the beginning the most guilt-free attack type of game you can do because I don't know who owns that faction. You just
Mhm.
send out your people. So I like that game. All right. Is that already your number two recommendation, Nico?
Oh, oh, was it my turn? What did I say? Ticket to Ride. Let's see.
No,
I
you
said one,
social
two,
deduction. So that
three.
was
Oh, okay. No, no, no. Yeah, I was just adding to that. Okay. Okay. So this one is a kind of medyo shallow yung pagdagdag ko sa kanya sa list ko. Um, Scythe. So I'm recommending Scythe.
Mm-hmm.
Scythe is a solid game, pretty good game. A lot of people like it. But I'm only adding it to this list for one reason. Something you should check out is the way that it's designed for such a big game. It's really quick because you tend to do a lot of your actions and turns on another player's turn. Um, it's not one of those games wherein when you wait for the player to finish their turn. And it's even, if I remember right, it's even suggested in the rule book. So right inside you have your mat, and then you pick what action you're gonna do for the turn. And I, though I think I read it on the rule book. I can probably look for it later if it's true or just my imagination. But there was even a rule there saying that once you've put your your thingy on what action you decide, it's encouraged for the next player to start their turn.
Yeah.
And so while you're deciding the details of your action, they're already taking their turn and they're doing something. And that's why I think it's one of those hidden things that people don't really recognize on why Sight is such a good game. It's because the downtime is so low. Because by the time you've
Yeah.
decided the details on what you're doing, it's probably almost your turn again. So you
Yep.
don't have that just waiting for people and stuff like that.
And if you're like
And
me,
huh?
that
Sorry.
that if you're like me that's really bad at this game, and you play with people like Dwayne, and he's so and I got to play in the table once, and
Mhm.
I just decided on what to do. I passed the turn, and
Uh-huh.
then I was just about to finish what I was doing. Somebody was tapping me because it was my turn again. It's like, wait, I'm
Yeah.
not yet done. Why
Mhm.
are you guys so fast?
Yeah, so it's a neat trick, but you also have to see on how it was possibly done. How
Hmm,
does this game allow it, and why don't other games allow the same thing?
correct.
Um, because it really speeds up the game, makes it more accessible, and I mean, I after seeing that, parang na mas nabobore ako sa mga games na maghihintay ka kasi parang eh, hindi na pala kailangan eh. You can actually just keep playing and playing. Just keep going and going. So just for that little thing, that I think it's a
It was
good thing
able
to
to
do.
segment, sort of
Mhm.
sector your actions out that it doesn't
Mhm.
affect the game state for other
Yeah,
players, but you're
but
still interacting,
yeah, you're
diba?
still interacting, and you're still what you're doing is still important to the other players.
Correct.
It's not like you're all isolated playing solo games by
Yes. Yes.
yourselves, right?
Yeah.
So like, how did they do that balance wherein they got rid of the downtime, but your action's still important to everybody else. And yeah, it's just such a good thing that you have to consider when you're making a big complex game, just to keep your players engaged the whole time. So there, just for
Mhm.
that little thing, that's it.
All right, cool. My number two is actually the game that I think it. I think it's the main game that inspired my idea for Folded Wishes. So the game is called Kodinka. I had a lot of other
Kala ko correct for.
influences for Kodinka, for Folded Wishes. The other one was Onitama, but Kodinka was just using 4 tiles per player. There's just a formation. You just need to arrange your color to a certain sequence, and that unlocks a key. You just have a simple set of rules. You do that. There's some sort of random card play to be able to sort of quickly change the board, sort of like a trap card, but very abstract and very distilled uh, rules and mechanics. However, it, with such a small space, it looks really nice, and it plays nice, and it's also very brain burning. And I think I've always liked designs that come in a small package but pack a big punch, and it sort of gives, at least for me, new designers, what can you do with just a bunch of tiles or just a bunch of tokens, and you just create rules around that, and then nothing else. Now the rest is dynamics of social dynamics of players, um, but not to the point where it's chess like, where it's or go, where it's such a science already that the science of play is so mathed out. So you still have that randomness of play. So I think I like Kodenka in the sense that it's a good game for new designers to try out, because it gives you a glimpse of how to make an abstract game well, and at the same time be able to showcase like what is a good set of randomness, what is a good amount of finite rules, but still give some randomness and flavor to a game. So that is Kodinka. All right, last one, I think. Sir Freddy.
Uh, Last category would be area control. Uh, and lumalabas sa tingin ko yung, I think my age is showing with some of my game choices. Uh, so area control, the the most basic game na nakita ko for area control is probably Risk.
Mhm.
These days, Risk would not be considered a good game, maybe. But if you, at its core, siya yung, it's a very basic area control. Eh. You're just throwing dice around, which represent your army. So you're trying to defeat the other guy's army, which is also represented by dice. Yes, I know it's very random and feels like, ano, is it Ameritrash? I don't know, but it is area control. And 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 the future iterations of that game, na area control, then we get things like Blood Rage, Kemet, Scythe. Pero may basic siya na gagawa ka ng map and then you get resources based on that map.
Mhm.
So yun yung core essence ng area control. And I think Risk is it's a very simple game that has that mechanic. So maganda rin siyang pag-aralan. And
Yep.
of course, yung mga susunod sa
The
kanya,
the descendants.
from that design. Di ba? So yun, area control. And siguro bago matapos yung ano, hindi lang naman yung we don't only look at genres and then what was the first and what came. You can also look at components. Eh. There will be innovations using components like tiles. Tiles, yun nga sinabi ni Ron, Kodinka, Carcassonne, things like that. Dice, you can modify, you can use dice as a point of innovation with something like Sagrada. Hindi siya, di ba? It's not just used to random numbers. It actually becomes part of your what you're building in dice. It gets used up. And then there's Dice Forge na talagang they change what dice is.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ina-assemble mo pa yung dice mo.
It's such an
And
engineering level.
even with miniatures, if you look at something like HeroClix, his Mage Knight, that was such a groundbreaking innovation for its during its time. Kasi you put the stats on the base, and you don't carry around a book or a long army. There's lots of things you can improve on with the basic kung ano yung what we already have. And that's basically what game design is about. So you look at something that's already there, you mix, match, and then build upon that.
Right.
What we're trying to avoid is just repeating what's already been done, or repeating it and repeating it worse. Di ba? That's the worst thing you can do. Do something that's already out there, and then you come up with something worse, which is something we've seen.
Mhm.
Let's not mention names, but it has happened.
Oh.
Yes. Yes. There,
Oh, I,
there
I, have,
are
I have no idea what you're talking about.
there are 5,000, 7,000 games produced before pandemic. I think after
Yeah.
pandemic, I think that was dramatically reduced.
Mhm.
But there are so many games, and a lot of them don't work. So as an aspiring designer, we're not trying to discourage you, but it's
Yeah.
more of like I think having a knowledge of what works, what doesn't work, what already is not only what's trending, but understanding the reasoning behind the mechanic, why that was being used. I think it gives you a good arsenal and a good way to bring depth to your design. All right, Nico,
and
you're
and
number
also
one
this, I think this is for
show
another, maybe
episode.
another show, another episode, but also just understanding the difference between a good game and a publishable game, because
Mm,
those two are very different.
Yeah.
I think right now we're just talking about game design on its
Yeah.
own, but sometimes a good game just can't be published. Sometimes a bad game can be published. So
Yep. That's true.
right, that's just a very different thing. Yeah. Okay. So I have I have three more games on my list, but they're all with somewhat shallow, or also for, like just with sight, just that part. But I think the most relevant would be um, Vast. So I would suggest Vast. And probably the only reason why I would suggest that is because I haven't played Root. So, because I don't know, people kind of seem like they like Root more, but I haven't played it, so sorry. So,
hmm.
Vast.
Um,
How is
Sige,
it?
go
Is
ahead.
it
I'll support you on the root versus vast thing. Sige, go
okay?
ahead.
I mean, it's made by the same guy, right? It's made by the
Yes,
same
yes,
guy.
Yes.
it is. It is
That's
same
the
group.
Leader Games. Okay, so and the reason why is so there's asymmetry, right? With Vast. I don't know if it was, but Vast has is an asymmetrical game. Each player plays differently, but it's not that in particular, which I think would be a good thing to note down. Um, it's with one particular faction, which is the Goblins. The reason why is because, so just an intro of Vast and the way it plays is there are, well, four basic factions would be the knight, the dragon, the goblins, and the cave.
Right.
Um, and each of these factions kind of play like a game that already exists. So the knight kind of plays like a dungeon crawl, right?
Mhm.
The dragon, arguably somewhat like a Euro resource management game. In a way, don't quote me on that. And the cave kind of plays like a dungeon master, right?
Right.
So you have these different factions. They play kind of like other games, but the one faction that doesn't really play like an archetype game would be the goblins. So the goblins, and the rule book of Bast is not very good. So it took me a while to like really process like, okay, how do these goblins work? And I even now I mean I figured it out once, but trying to remember it now, it's like I'm still a little confused. But the goblins, they play on the outskirt of the board, all right, because they're afraid of the light of the night. So they play on the outskirts of the board. Sometimes they come in and attack whatever, but there. And what for me is so interesting about that is that the knight, the dragon, the cave, they can all exist as separate games, but the goblins can only exist in Vast. It can't exist in any other kind of game because what kind of game would that be wherein you have this board and you can only interact with the outer layer of the board. You can't touch anything in the middle. So like why even have a board? It doesn't make any sense. There's this middle part and imagine you're playing this imaginary game where everyone is goblins and the middle part is just empty. Things are happening there, but you can't do anything about it. So it just doesn't make any sense. It can only make sense in Vast because you have the other players interacting with the middle. And that for me is such a cool thing because it shows like the depth of knowledge of the designer in back going back again to the design spaces. So again, what you want with the game is the design spaces to interact with each other so that they overlap and they create emergent behaviors. And with playing as playing just on the outskirt of the board, you are not interacting with a lot of the design spaces. So, but it works just because in this game there are other players that interact with those design spaces, and then you get to interact with those players.
Right.
So it's pretty cool because it kind of deconstructs a lot of like game design theory, wherein you're able to make this role exist in this game just because there are other players that exist there. But if you just took out that goblin role and just let it exist on its own, it wouldn't make sense as a game. So it's good to play games like this, wherein they kind of deconstruct game mechanics, deconstruct the game theory, game design spaces, just to help you remember like the theory behind these game mechanics and to sort of just show you things out of the box ideas, so that you're not just stuck thinking within like the archetypes of okay, there's a dungeon crawler, there's a ganito, there's a ganyan. That goblin thing probably can't exist anywhere else, but at least the fact that it exists there is just eye-opening, and it's good to just remember that things like that can exist, so that when you're working on your own game, your eyes are also open, like trying to look for things that possibly don't exist. So it's good to just think about it in terms of the theory, game design theory, and not just at what kind of games exist, but just go back on the theory. So there.
Okay. Yeah. So root kind of pretty much the same idea. It does merge the intersections more. It doesn't
Mhm.
look like what you said. The goblins felt like it intersected in a different plane.
Mhm.
Like the game had its sort of intersection points, and
Mhm.
then goblins are like, well, there are players, and then I'm now intersecting here in this
Yeah,
other
yeah, yeah.
plane, right?
Yeah.
With root, they were able to sort of distill everybody back down. However, they sort of gave them their own personal spaces too. So I think
Mhm.
that was like the change in root.
Mhm.
Um, root is such a difficulty to teach because you teach the game 4 times or
Yeah.
however a number of expansions. So
Yeah,
every time
just
you
like
teach the
us.
game,
Oh, yeah,
you
just
have
like
to teach each player exactly how to play it. So that's the main barrier.
and,
However,
and and everyone has to listen because you can't play your faction if you don't understand how the other factions work as well.
yes, yes.
Yeah, for Bass at least.
But so the way to play the way to learn root, download the app, play the app, now you know how to play Root, and the
Mm.
app of Root is such a marvel of transitioning board game design into the digital space. I think
Mm.
they even won an award, I believe, uh, because it
Mm.
was such a good design. All right, interestingly, Nico, my number one recommendation is an asymmetrical game. However,
Mhm.
it is just two player. So actually, Sir Freddy
Mm.
got to hear me talk about this game because one of the local aspiring designers was having some challenges and designing his local sort of one v one asymmetrical game, and I said you might want to check out Blood of an Englishman.
Mhm.
Blood of an Englishman is a small card game. You play as Jack, or you play as the other players plays as the Giant, and they play so differently. Like the Giant has this big slow moves, but it's so dramatic. Like, oh, I will move, things here to here, and that's it. I just have one move. But Jack has a lot of little moves. They can do, but the impact is small. Like they need to build up, and the framework itself is just numbers and words. The Giant wants to be able to say FIFA for fun, and Jack wants to run away with build up beanstalks, to run away with the prizes. You can technically play the game with playing cards.
Mhm.
So if you want to prototype it, I think to a certain degree, you could. Not all of it. Like you have to pretend with the other components. However, it's such a good design that it was able to create this feeling of asymmetry, with such again a small, very concise framework. I think from there you can branch off, learn root, and learn Twilight Struggle, or all of the other sort of Raptor. There's a lot of asymmetrical games, but it's always a good thing to sort of see like the small games. Una, they're also cheaper, so it's a lot easier to try out the mechanics and try out learning new things. So there you have it. I hope, for the aspiring designers and our fellow gamers who are interested into maybe dabbling a bit into game design, hopefully we were able to share with you some games to try out that might help you in your design journey. If you guys liked this episode, and we will be doing this more often, hopefully, we will be having at least a habit. We're going to figure out what is the schedule, but it is something we want to be able to do because I think there's a good opportunity to showcase the local designers. There are a lot of members in Unpub. We um, so Nico, would you like to talk about a little bit of Unpub, and how's Unpub doing, and what's the normal
Mm.
habit of Unpub
Okay.
nowadays?
So Unpub is the regular monthly meetup events of different game designers here based here, and we meet up just to play test each other's games. So before the pandemic, it was going really well. We met every second Saturday of the month. It was an unbroken combo for years until the pandemic hit. So like,
Yep.
um, and then it went on hiatus for a few months. But because I don't know, I guess we were hopeful that the pandemic would just end and we could just go back and we didn't have to figure out how to transition it to online. But we're still here. So now, yeah, people have figured out how to port their games to Tabletopia, to playing cards at IO, and we have a Discord server. If any of you are interested, yeah, just there's a schedule I poll every month, and then just we just play. It's nothing formal, no real structure. We just hang out and play. We're now exploring another thing wherein we play on another Saturday of the month. We just and this idea actually came from Sir Freddy, where the idea was just to play, and then after we just discuss our thoughts about the game. Just share what we saw, anything about it, the mechanics, the UI, the graphic design. We actually the weekend before MartinCon was the first one, and we played Not Alone, and that was pretty fun. Ron was there. We had a long. We actually talked more. We talking about the game was longer than actually the playing of the game,
Yes.
which we were surprised. Wow, we are a group of opinionated people. We had so much thought about it. so yeah. Just join. We're just there to try to support each other. That's basically
Yes.
it.
So everyone is welcome if you are trying to learn how to do game design, or you're testing out the game, or you are still grasping of like how to start, or you're already somewhere in the middle of your game design.
Mhm.
Being able to converse with other game designers, also find people that are also maybe in the same struggle as you or same challenges. I think it's a good avenue to learn from fellow designers, fellow gamers. It's always a very different feel. I personally, when I play test with gamers, they're often trying to break the game or trying to figure out how to hack the game. When you're playing with game designers, they're trying to figure out like how you built the game, how
Mhm.
what was the and it's a very different psychology, and they're sort of trying to understand the mechanics and how the effect of it from people. So it's a very different view that you would not normally get when you're just playing with gamers. It is a good test for gamers, but it's also good to test your games with fellow designers, because I think
And
there's
then
a
and then you play test with people like Sir Freddy, who's figuring out how to sell it. So
exactly where you now present this game. Good game, Ron. I had a few of those. Like, that's a good design, Ron, but no, can't print it. I don't I don't think we can print that. Okay.
yeah. Mm.
But yes. So there you have it. Amazingly, we spent an hour, more than an hour and a half,
Mhm.
talking about games. So thank you everyone for joining us today. This is LarongAtin, in partnership with Variable Play. Uh, like, share, and subscribe. You can find us in Facebook, Larong Atin Facebook page,
Mhm.
Unpub Facebook group, and of course the variable social media.
Mhm.
Okay. Good night.
Good
Till next
night.
time.
Everyone, thanks.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Good night.